It's a high-tech conversation.
And a low-tech topic.
Live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Bench Talk 101.
Welcome everybody to Bench Talk 101. Obviously we've got familiar faces here, so that's great. So you all know the rules, you know how it all works. I just wanted to give a quick reminder though that this was all about COVID and why we set this up. And kind of, you know, as we're hearing in the news, we're starting to come up with a second spike, which is obviously very worrying for all of us. We've been allowed out, we've been allowed to gather, and now we're getting told that we can't do that, and now we have the rule of 6. So luckily with Zoom and with the YouTube, we can have far more than 6 on here, so we can carry on talking and sharing all the good practice and all the good expertise that we've got on here. So less from me, I'm going to pass you over to Derek now, who's going to introduce our guest speaker for today. Derek.
Exactly, yes. So good evening, everybody. It's no exaggeration to say that tonight's speaker is nothing short of furniture restoration royalty. I first got acquainted with Mike over at the Mark Adams School of Woodworking in Indiana last year, where they've actually named a whole wing of their building after him. Mike teaches all over the US and regularly gives talks on the topics of finishing and upholstery, and he's an expert. He's an expert in his field and a member of several prestigious organisations advising on and promoting the care and conservation of period furniture. Now, Mike cut his teeth on restoring classic cars, specialising on early British makes like MG and Jaguar. But tonight, though, he's going to give us an upholsterer's view of how to make furniture suitable for upholstering. So please give a very warm welcome to one of the nicest guys in the business and someone I'm happy to call my friend tonight. It's Mike Mascellie. So Mike, it's over to you.
Wow, that's quite an introduction, Derek. Thank you. I just say hi to all my American friends and British friends, and I really appreciate you guys letting me do this. I spent a wonderful week in Indiana with Derek. We were teaching in different rooms, and we wound up having dinner together and spending time together. And it's one of those things that we just met each other and decided that we should have met a long time ago, and if all goes well, we'll stay friends for a long time. So I've got this challenge in the work that I do when I speak to furniture folks, because from my experience, the two things that furniture folks hate the most in this order are finishing and upholstery. So those are the two things that I teach. So I'm kind of in an uphill battle here always to bring awareness and sort of cooperation between the fields. And I will say this at the outset. I'm going to give you a little talk about furniture work, particularly upholstered furniture, but our American furniture tradition starts in England. We're obviously an English colony. And what we got were English tradespeople and English furniture. We did not get the English guilds. We don't have a tradition of teaching young people here, as Geoffrey and Derek are doing in your wonderful school. We're not teaching the hand trades here, particularly not upholstery. And as a result, pretty much all American furniture makers are self-taught, and many of them are really badly trained, if trained at all. So I'm going to give you a little talk. Please stop me if I'm going too fast. This is me in one of my typical teaching assignments. I bring my kit and I'll teach folks, basic upholstery or advanced techniques, whatever it is. This is my toolkit. And this, what Derek was mentioning, is a group of folks here in America that got together about 20 years ago, all in the furniture conservation and restoration trades. And I'm happy to say I have some friends all over the country who are some of the top restorers in our country, including some folks retired from the Smithsonian, some top conservators, and some people in furniture restoration shops. So I am on Instagram. I'm doing a little bit less now because of family commitments and other times, but I'll mention this again at the end. And I have published a whole bunch of stuff. I've done a bunch of videos. If you look on the lower left here is a blue cover. That's the first Roubo book. My dear friend for life is a fellow called Don Williams. And I was very fortunate to work on all the Roubo projects. And there's a section in the second volume of Roubo about upholstery, which I got to write, which is pretty fun and pretty cool. So I can talk more about that type of work as we get going on here. So I teach quite a lot. This one here on the right, Mark Adams, is where I met Derek. My entire teaching schedule for this year has been canceled. So if all goes well, the one up on the top here, Connecticut Valley, if all goes well, I'll be teaching there in November for the first time for a weekend. So let's hope that works. So what I want to do is just kind of assume that you folks don't have a lot of background in upholstery. If you do, I'll apologize in advance. But basically, what we're talking about is the evolution of chairs that you English folks would know as a simple back stool or a bobbin turned, spindle turned, simple stool without any permanently affixed cushion. It's just got a loose pillow. Well, that form evolved into this form, and basically in about the late 1500s, say 1600 round figures, this form becomes what I'm defining as upholstered, which means the covering is permanently affixed to the frame as opposed to the loose pillow. And very quickly, that form evolved into crazy levels of detail all the way up to, and finally 200 or 300 years later, in this spectacular thing that we here in America call a Turkish chair, which has got more tufts and rouches and horsehair in it than you can possibly imagine. So from simple beginnings, we get fairly elaborate work. So again, my definition here is we're permanently affixing the materials. So in our world, my terminology that I like to use, this is to go quickly, the inside arm, inside back, they're kind of intuitive terms. If I speak about the deck, I'm talking about the thing that the cushion sits on, not the cushion itself. And obviously we're going to put a little dust cover on the bottom. But upholstery comes in all shapes and sizes. That Turkish chair you saw a minute ago, that big black one, that's what it looks like without the upholstery. It's what we call an iron back. So all of that work, all of those diamonds, all of that tufting, everything that you saw is all made by an upholsterer with burlap, needle, thread, and probably a fair bit of bad language. It's very elaborate and complicated work, but we can start with simple work, which is, relatively simple chairs in all different forms. This is our classic American Philadelphia wing chair, all the way up into arts and crafts or whatever it is. So all of these forms encompass the upholstery work, and hopefully some of those will appeal to each of you. I tried to put a bunch of different things on that would appeal to a wide audience. So from this humble beginning of these little back stools, it's what we would call in the trade flat work. In other words, there are no springs. It's simply something soft to sit on that's not a board. So that form evolves over time into some decorative elements, fringes and trims and so on. But what's underneath there is eventually a hollow frame with a simple drop-in seat with a little bit of webbing in there and some burlap or hessian, as you would call it, and some coarse fiber, maybe core fiber or horsehair and cotton, and that's your seat. Well, the French, as we know, do everything to excess. So their upholstery tradition is hugely different. They also did work very flat, but it's also very elaborate and very curvaceous and very, gilded frames and fancy work and tapestry and so on. And the English work typically is much more sturdy and simple and plain. So for a simple drop-in or a slip seat, which could be in various forms, this is a little corner chair, that seat could be flat, it could be tall, it could be hollow, it could be solid wood, it could be all kinds of different variations of what is possible, but each would drop inside of an existing frame. So the consideration here for the furniture maker and the upholsterer, that's the dialogue that I want to have with you guys, is what do you want that seat to look like? So how big of a gap do we have to leave around the perimeter? How much do you bevel the top of the frame? Because that's going to telegraph through into the seat. Do you want it high, low, soft, firm? What are we going to do? So in terms of that gap, here's a simple slip seat. And here it is sitting in a fairly typical chair. So the question always becomes, can you guys see the little pointer thing? Just wave if you can see it. Okay. So in this little gap area here is a challenge for knowing how much space to leave. And the answer is almost always, it depends on what your finished cover is going to be. If it's going to be silk, it's different than if it's going to be leather. So I'll swing back on this later, but the goal here is obviously to have the seat fit properly, nicely in the frame, just comfortably snug not be too big, not be too small. So that's sort of the beginning point of the dialogue between a furniture maker and upholsterer is something as simple as a slip seat gap. So these seats is what I would call a slip over. So you've got a loose frame that sits on top of your chair frame, but the upholstery overhangs the frame, so it doesn't have to drop in anywhere. It just has to sit and overhang. So that gives a little bit more option in terms of what the choices are. The upholstery treatment can be different, but we have considerations. If we're going to web it on the bottom, is it going to interfere with the corner blocks? Is it going to sit up too high? Or which way are we going to do this? And again, I'll try to go through these a little bit more in detail as I go through. So I'm using a term here, which I kind of like you to keep with you, was a tight seat. And what I mean by that is a loose cushion is not part of this chair. The seat is fully upholstered. There's no loose bit. The seat is tight. And generally that chair, as you see it there in the picture, can be done completely without any machine sewing. The leap for the upholsterer, once you bring me a chair with a loose cushion, whether it's welted or not, I've either got to hand sew a big, huge cushion or I've got to machine sew it, and that puts it in a different category. So here's a group of tight seat chairs from simple to a little bit more elaborate. That's a Gainsborough lolling chair here in the middle, English form. And here's a real fancy French one. These are all tight seats. There's no springs in these. There's no machine sewing. So these, relatively speaking, are much more approachable from upholstery than it would be for something that's got a cushion. I want to throw this out and just say at the outset here, upholstery is a sewing trade. This is a needle and thread piece of business. And the true upholsterers grew out mostly in the English tradition out of the saddle trade and out of the carriage trade. So you're taking a piece of big straw mattress and a piece of burlap and you're sewing it into tufts or gathers so it doesn't move around, and then eventually you're going to move that into carriage work, and eventually you're going to move it into furniture. So here's an example of a hand sewn foundation, and underneath that burlap is a bunch of curled horsehair. And here's a much more extreme version of some elegant work done by a French colleague of mine. This is a tableau version of a Louis XVI chair, all done in horsehair and stitches. And this is my friend Bruno's work. That is a fully hand-sewn 9-foot settee. There are several unbelievable number of man hours in that kind of a treatment. So the hand-sewn work is the way you build up a foundation of a coarse stuffing on the bottom and something softer on the top. And eventually we're going to get to a point where you have the ability to make any kind of shape. If you know how to do this sort of sewing, you can do rounds and squares and diamonds and pleats and all sorts of different variations, basically all with a needle and thread. So that's the work of my friend Bruno. If we move to sprung work, which is really the kind of the tradition of mostly what we saw here in American furniture up until the Second World War, we're talking about coil springs. And I learned English tradition, which is tying the springs in 8 ways. So if you look at those spring ties on the bottom, one string goes north-south, one goes east-west, and then the 2 diagonals, and eventually form 8 knots on each of these coils. And the game plan is to get those coils so that they behave and create the shape that we want and compress in the right way that we want, so we have the right seat at the right height in the right shape. And again, just to show you some extreme versions, these are incredibly elaborately hand-sewn sprung chairs that once they're done, the customer doesn't realize the amount of work is involved to create this, and they just assume that it's just a big piece of foam. So there's tremendous work that can be done here in spring work to create various shapes and sizes. And what happened in America here, and I'm assuming, I don't know the British tradition as well, but after the Second World War, we got into these, what we call here ziggers, or I think what you folks would call a serpentine spring, a zigzag spring. And this sort of revolutionized mass production upholstery because you don't have to do all the hand tying. You just put the clips in, you stretch the ziggers, and off you go. So it's still sprung, it's still more comfortable than a flat seat, but it's a very different sort of springing. So here's a cutaway of a really classic sprung chair. You've got a foundation here of hand-tied springs. The first stuffing would be something coarse, what you British folks would call core fiber, coconut, or straw, something coarse, and then maybe some horsehair and cotton. And then we've got a lumbar pad here tucked into the back of the arm. And underneath everything, we've got cotton at the top for softness. Maybe what you folks would call the word's going out of my head here, a wool. What's that word in the English translation? Just went out of my head. But the thing I'm trying to illustrate here is that all these components work together. And at the very top, we have a full, what we call muslin here, what you folks would call calico undercover. So the chair is fully upholstered in this white material, what as we would refer to the chair, in the white. So you can test it, sit on it, look at it, adjust it, and the show cover just sits there happily, just like a lady's dress hangs beautifully on the model. There should be no stress on the show cover. All the work is done underneath. So if we do webbed and sprung coils like this, the question that very frequently comes from when I work with upholsterers is, well, how many springs do we need? What kind of springs? How tall are the springs? And I'm going to try to make this simple in general. The springs are going to be tied with a twine in some sort of a pattern. And you can see here on the bottom, this one creates sort of a dome. Well, if I did that with a 4-inch spring, it would be different than I did if I did it with a 7-inch spring. So in addition to getting the spring placement correct, the height of the spring makes a huge difference. And also keep in mind that spring steel fatigues over time. So very often old coil springs that do not appear to be broken are simply, they don't have any strength. Their tension has gone out of them and they don't support anything. So our classic pattern of a typical seat would be 9 springs tied all 8 ways. Those are the red lines, and it would result in something that looks like that. So I'm saying that's the English tradition. The French tradition is very different. The French use typically a lighter gauge spring. They put more of them in. The springs are very slightly compressed as opposed to the English style where they're compressed about 1/3 of their height. And they tie the ties front to back, side to side, and they'll do double ties on the lower coils. So a different strategy to get to a similar result. And here's a classic version of a French front as opposed to English, just a little different strategy about the way the springs are tied. So in American springs, and I'm assuming you guys have more access to better materials in Europe, but our springs are all the same size here. They're 3.5 inches in diameter, and that's the reason that they're sized the webs. Those black and red webs are 3.5 inches wide. So English tradition, we put the webs in where the webs intersect, that's where the springs go, so the spring fits exactly at the intersection of the 2 webs. And what we would do here in English American work is we would compress that spring 2/3 of its height. So if I'm trying to get a spring to finish at 5 inches compressed, I need to start with a taller spring, and then I'm going to pull it down. The French would do it a different way, but this would be typical English work. Oh, what happened? Oh no. Oh no, Derek, what did I do?
No, you're all good. You're all good.
Hang on. Okay. So I'm just going to skip over this quickly. Here in America, we can still buy these made-up spring units. These are very common in arts and crafts furniture where you're buying the whole thing made up in wire and you sort of drop it in. This is what we would call a Marshall unit in American work, where it's all hand-pocketed individual coils. And these are set in certain sizes, and you drop these in. And in order to use them, you need a fair bit of space. You can't put these in a little tiny chair. If there are questions about these, I'll come back to that, but I'm going to kind of skip past that so I can talk quickly about what we call ziggers or serpentine springs, which come on a big coil. They fasten on the sides with a clip and a nail. And the challenge with these things is when you cut them, you wind up with a ragged end. And the tool pictured on the bottom here is a spring end bottom. When the spring is cut, it looks like this, where the arrow is, and after it's formed, it looks like that. So that little tab makes it so it doesn't jump out of the clip. There are any number of different clip configurations and zigger configurations, and my work with contemporary furniture makers, very often we can solve a problem with serpentine springs that we can't solve with coils because the framework doesn't allow the placement of the coil. So here's an example of a simple front to back serpentine spring chair. And here's a more elaborate one where it's a couch where we've got some other braces and so on. And the framework and the design of the upholstery is such that these springs are give more options as far as what we're doing. I'm just going to again mention this very quickly. Some of you have seen this, particularly if you see Danish furniture or European furniture where I happen to be Italian, and I'm going to say that Pirelli webs that are made by Pirelli rubber are wonderful when you first put them in, and they're terrible. The rubber turns into a potato chip, what you guys would call a crisp, and it gets brittle and hard, and they fail, and they're awful. I hate them. So I don't strongly recommend Pirelli or rubber webs, but I'll just mention them. If somebody wants to go back to that, we can talk about them. But again, in contemporary furniture, very often they'll solve a problem because you don't need any structure to put them in. You can just drill a few holes and off you go. So if we have something with a loose cushion, classic wing chair, this is what we would call a T cushion, the shape of the letter T. That means I've got 2 hours plus at the sewing machine to create that cushion. These are welted cushions. And sometimes on a big couch like this, it's far more work to make those cushions than it is to upholster the rest of the piece. So cushion work is the bane of upholstery because it's tedious, it's boring, and you can't lose your focus. It's very fussy. You've got to do it exactly right. So cushions can range in anywhere from really low, 2-inch cushion on an old wing chair to a modern furniture. Sometimes they're 6 inches now. And I'm just going to illustrate this quickly. In classic work, a cushion would be made of horsehair and cotton, or maybe if you look at the one on the extreme right, there are some very light gauge springs in the center, what we call a sprung cushion. So you've got springiness in the cushion in addition to what happens on top, which is feathering down. So these are padded up in any number of different configurations, and we can take the same cushion and make it sit like a brick or make it sit like a feather pillow and anywhere in between. So in the discussion that you have with the furniture maker is, if we're going to do a loose cushion, is it going to simply be a block of one dimension foam, one density, or are we going to make an elaborate multi-layer foam cushion? Are we going to do a feathering down? We're going to do a sprung cushion. There's all kinds of options for cushions that will dramatically change the way the chair sits. Most commercial furniture made today is done with simple foam and what we call cushion wrap, or a Dacron quilt bat wrapping like this. So you just have a little bit of foam and a little bit of Dacron, and that's going to be your slip seat. A piece of foam, a little scrimmy Dacron pulled over, and you're done. But even within that system, there are great variations in the density of the foam, the layering up of the foam, the thickness of the Dacron, the type of the Dacron. So all of these things can make a difference in the shape and what we would call the sit and the loft, the shape of the seat, the actual fabric, the form of the seat. So again, I'm going quickly. In terms of foam, there are so many different kinds of foam. It's ridiculous. I could spend a whole hour program talking to you about how to buy foam and what the options are. But what happened with these foam treatments is you're getting all of this new furniture where in the old days you'd have all this structure. Nowadays, I'm seeing couches like this one where there isn't any of this underneath work. It's simply a piece of poly material and a giant 6-inch piece of foam covered with fabric, no Dacron, no muslin, no nothing, and they're just really cheaply made. But it is possible to do really good work with foam if you know how to work with that material and how to specify the right layers for the right application. So here's a quick little chart, and let me just say at the end, I'll give my email at the end. If anybody wants a copy of this PowerPoint show, I'll be happy to email it to you, no charge. So here's some foam density ideas. Foam is made from petroleum, and you can use more or less chemical and more or less air, and you can create foam from super, super soft to super, super firm. And if you, usually it would be specified in 2 numbers, the ILD number and the density. And if you're talking to an upholsterer that you're working with and they don't know that there's different kind of foam, or they don't know what an ILD or a density is, you might have the wrong upholsterer. So you need to educate up a little bit on what's going on with foam. So let me get to my main part of my speech here, folks, is how to work with the frames when you're doing upholstered work. So here's a classic chair being upholstered, English style. It's a big, beefy piece of white ash, big, maybe 1-inch thick frame. This frame is upside down, and I'm putting in my webs, and I'm putting those big tacks into that big frame. Okay, so I'm going to stretch them and tension them, and I want that frame to be rigid. I want some corner bracing in there. I want to be able to pull it tight and get some real racking tension on there. And when I'm done, I want to be able to cover it up nicely and have it be, inconspicuous on the bottom. So for me to do that, here's the frame looking from the bottom. If the frame is only 3/4 of an inch, I've got to tack my webs. I've got to tack at least my show cover coming the other direction. And at the end, I've got to tack my dust cover on the bottom. So at the very minimum, I've got 3 rows of fasteners, preferably one here, one there, which is medium. So these are heavy tacks, these are medium tacks, and these are very light tacks. But I've got to allocate that little 3/4 of an inch space to all these 3 things. So my preference would be, if you can give me 7/8, that's better. You want to give me 1 inch, that's lovely. But if you've given me less than 3/4 and it's going to be a webbed chair, that's a real challenge. I don't have enough room to do what I need to do. The other thing that's a killer are corner blocks. Here's that beautiful big Gainsborough Lolling chair, and look at the size of these corner blocks. Can you see my arrow? Where the heck did it go? Ah, I lost it right here. You see this giant corner block, corner brace? I want to put this spring where that brace is. And I can't, because when I compress the spring, it's going to hit the brace. So what the furniture maker has done is he shortened up the field where I can put my springs and given me some options that I didn't really like. I want to be able to pull the springs further toward the corners, and I can't do it. So I got that chair done. We did it. I put my deck on. We got the thing done. And now I look at this chair and you say, okay, this chair has really tight old school corner blocks in the back and no corner blocks in the front. That could be a challenge for a different way, where I may have some problem with racking because there aren't any corner blocks. So corner blocks are a big deal. I want you to look, you guys, a little bit at the tacking rails. In this wing chair up here, upper right, there are tacking rails here at the bottom of the inside arm. Inside arm, inside back, inside arm. What that tacking rail does is determines the height of my seat. I've got to get my seat to tuck underneath in between that gap. If that tacking rail is an inch higher, I've got a different set of options for my seat. If the tacking rail is too tight for me to get my fingers in, it makes it a misery to do the chair. Look at this beautiful reproduction done by a very prestigious school here in America. Inside arm tacking rail, inside arm tacking rail. There is no tacking rail on the inside back bottom. How the heck am I supposed to upholster that? And the fellow says, oh, well, we followed the plans. Yeah, well, guess what? The plans weren't not correct. So the placement of these rails is critical. And again, that side tacking rail there will be a big determinant in what the final height of that seat's going to be. So here's an example, again, some older work. You can see the inside arm tacking in burlap done at the bottom of the rail over here. So that determines the height of that, and the seat obviously has to tuck into the gap. Different, look at this one. Tacking rail is 6 inches up from the bottom of the seat. Now I've got to fill this gap in with something if the seat isn't going to cover it. So this means this chair probably had a big, huge, thick feather cushion to be able to fill that gap in. Same thing here on these outside tackers, where I might need a tacking rail here at the end of this arm to be able to tuck something in. Wing chairs create a bunch of problems. If you have questions about those, I'll be glad to spend a whole bunch of time on wing chairs. But just to go back to this, that chair eventually has to get to this place. And the determining factors are going to be, how high is this front rail off the floor? What are the placement of these rails? What am I doing with this inside back? How fat or soft are these inside arms going to be? Where is that going to finish? How is this going to tack around the outside of the outside arm underneath? I got to tack something here. Do I have some place to tack it? So that's the discussion that we have with the furniture makers, to try to say, give me something I can work with. So for basic rules of thumb for modern furniture, for our generation, these are some numbers I think you folks can work with. For at least an American tradition on our side, seat height is typically 18 off the floor. That's finished to the top of the seat. So if you're giving me you're bringing me a chair that starts out with a tacking rail that's 15 or 16 off the floor, I can't give you a big thick cushion because it's going to be too high to sit in for most people. Now, if your client is 5'2" or 6'9", it matters. But round figures, these are the rules that we go by typically. So if the seat is 18 off the floor, we'd want the arm height about 26. In other words, 8 inches above the seat deck would be a good arm height. Typically, a comfortable back rake's about 5 to 10 degrees. If you start raking them more than 10, it becomes something that you're going to fall asleep backwards in, like you would be in a recliner. So this would be a sort of a classic dining chair, side chair dimensions. And again, here we go with trying to measure this chair and see what we're doing in terms of height and depth and all these different considerations. And there are rules for these that are general that can help you in designs and say, well, gee, I really like this picture in this book. I don't have the dimensions. Maybe that backrest, it can't possibly be 50 inches tall. It wouldn't make any sense. Maybe it's only 46. So here's a real cushion. The inside back dimension is only 18 here. That's fairly tight. The front T-cushion width is 26. Look at the difference. That's a huge, big gap here. So as this seat tapers back, it makes the chair have a very different shape. And again, this is starting 14 off the floor with a 4-inch cushion to finish at 18. About 8 inches off the seat. That's a pretty comfortable chair. All right, I'm jumping subjects a little bit here just to get through the material so we have time for questions. Let me just back up if I can do it here. I don't know how to go backwards. Backwards. Okay, once we get to this point, all the upholstery is done and everything finishes to the bottom and to the back. And the last piece that goes in is the outside back. So all of the upholstery that goes onto the chair is going to finish and be tacked around the back and be closed up. What you're seeing in almost all modern furniture now, production furniture, is these outside back closures. I don't know if you can see this. It's got this stuff. In America, we call this ply grip or easy grip or something. It's a sheet metal punctured with teeth in it that's stapled in place, either with or without a welt. And you're doing a, let me just back up one. You're doing a previous, come on, mouse. You're doing a closure here in metal. And if you put your hand on the back of a modern chair and feel around the edge, if you feel that metal strip, it's one of these ply grip things. And they're a pain in the neck to put in. And as soon as they fail, as soon as somebody bumps that chair up against something and the edge starts to tear, you basically can't repair it. I am really not a big fan of this material, even though it's used in almost all modern chairs. And conventional furniture makers love it because it's inexpensive. You can put the outside back on in 15 minutes. What we do in traditional work is we hand close those outside backs with a curved needle and a blind stitch. So when you put your hand down the sides of the outside back, you feel nothing but stitch. You feel nothing but frame. There's no metal. So that's my preferred way. I think it's really the classic way that I teach to try to close up outside backs. And again, that creates more work for a upholsterer as opposed to a quick production job for a prototype maybe. So I'm just going to again touch very quickly on all the myriad options there are for tufts: deep tuft, shallow tuft, multiple double tuft, inside arm tuft, channel back. I mean, this is a classic piping work that I did on all those MGs and Jaguars, Derek. So we can do all kinds of elaborate work here. And this is all handwork, not done typically with a sewing machine. And this can add lots of value and often really dress up a chair in such a way that if you design for it at the beginning, if you have this discussion with the upholsterer, you can bring a lot of visual interest and a lot of comfort to a chair without a lot of extra expense. So sometimes those are really great options. I'm just going to, again, for those of you involved in antique work or in any kind of restoration work, we refer to these type of chairs as half over the rail. So the upholstery only comes down here and stops, and you see a piece of show wood, in this case walnut, this little Eastlake chair, that shows on the bottom. So when the upholstery touches the wood, there's a join here that has to be covered by something, typically something decorative. So here's a classic half over, bunch of other little half overs, and usually that trim is a GIMP material, a scroll GIMP, comes in a roll, English or French. Some of them are really expensive, some of them are really simple. And many of these now are, classically we would do those with a little GIMP tack, or in restoration work we use a pH neutral glue, PVA glue, but most of commercial upholsterers now are using a hot glue gun, just a plain old craft glue. And it works okay, but you'll see it and they start to peel off and they can be goopy and gloppy, and if the work isn't done nicely. This is my restoration work where we're putting this GIMP on with brush applied pH neutral PVA, white glue, like school glue, but a very expensive version of it. and just all pinned in place until the glue dries. So there's no must. That's the real pure form of how to get that scroll gimp on there. And what you're going to see in almost all of the modern chairs is you don't see it because it's too much work. So the upholsterer will take a scrap of the fabric of the show cover and make what we call double welt on a sewing machine. It's a double cord, and it trims out against the show wood like this. It makes it very comfortable, very simple, very easy. And most upholsterers love it. Let me just go back if I can do that. Because it can either be nail applied in the channel or glued on, and it's basically self-welting. You don't have to buy any extra trim. You just need a little piece of 2-inch wide strip of the same show cover. So this is what most of the contemporary furniture makers want because it's what's out there. They think the scroll gimp looks old-timey. So most of the stuff I'm doing in the last few years, everybody wants scroll gimp, and it takes a certain amount of time to make that, and you need a commercial sewing machine to do it. That's really hard to make without the right machine. So in the older work, when you have a finished surface, many times that trim was decorative. These are, Hepplewhite era, Chippendale era with the decorative nails, or, leather trimmed out this way. Let me just go past this quickly. Oh, I'm going to go, let me go back to that just quickly. So previous. So there are many, many ways to trim out where the fabric touches the wood. Again, if you have specific questions, I'd be glad to give you some options. One I don't have a picture of here is what we call a cardboard trim, where you take a thin strip of 1/2-inch wide cardboard and wrap it with the show cover, and it makes a flat version of what this nail trim looks like. So it's like double welt, but it's flat. So again, just different options about how to trim something where the fabric has to touch the wood. So again, I'm going to go through this whole big list here. I will email this to you if you want it. We can go back over any of these basic terms. But I want to introduce you to some friends of mine. And the first one may be known to many of you Brits, and he's what I consider absolutely the master. A fellow called David James. He's the Dean of British Upholstery. He has published any number of books and videos, including this one here, upper right, called Upholstery: A Complete Course. It is the Bible of hand-sewn traditional English, by association, American work. David is still alive. He's in his 90s. Obviously, you guys still have the Worshipful Company, which we don't have the guilds here. But David James is the master. If you're interested at all in anything with traditional upholstery, pick up any of the David James books. They are a treasure. And usually you can buy them cheap used, and they're wonderful books. So what he is describing are the processes of doing this, where you take a deck of burlap or hessian, you put a bunch of something coarse on it. This is core fiber, coconut. You're going to sew that down with some stitches to begin to form the beginnings of a seat. And once you do that, you're going to take a curved needle or a double ender and make some edge treatment here to build up the edges. We're going to make a hand-sewn tufted top. We're going to make a hand-welted decorative trim, and we're going to make this beautiful work all done basically almost like the work of a dressmaker, making something to custom fit that particular piece of furniture. So that's the stuff that's in the James books, and they're wonderful, wonderful books. He does not really talk at great length about modern upholstery, even though he does mention it in some of the later books. So I'm privileged to work. If you guys want to Google this or go on Instagram and look up this name, Bruno Lopez, he is the master of French upholstery on the American side. By the grace of God, he moved into my area several years ago. We are colleagues. I see him regularly. We work on almost all our pieces together. And this is the kind of work Bruno does. You saw this before. Some of this work is at the extreme high end of hand-sewn upholstery. These are for museum collections, for historic restorations. There's some Louis XVs in here. This is a club chair that chair finished and done in silk is going to be a $20,000 chair. So there is really great upholstery being done here in America, but very little of it. This is the French and English tradition, much more so than what we have here. This is one of Bruno's pieces. It's an Empire, and you just stand back and you look at it and you go, oh, that's not the same thing as doing slip seats. This man is a true American treasure. We're lucky to have him. This gentleman is named Leroy Graves. He spent his working career at Williamsburg here in America, which is a reconstruction of a historic village, town. Leroy just retired, and he developed something we call the Graves method. Here's a perfectly good early 17th century side chair. It looked beautifully upholstered. Worsted wool, handmade buttons, so on and so on. That chair is made like that. Every single component of this upholstery is removable. These are historic frames that are in many cases really, really valuable. They don't want to put any tacks into them. And Leroy's method was to make what we now call minimally intrusive upholstery, where everything is done with modern trickery. Some of these elements are made in sheet metal, aluminum, copper, plexiglass, Velcro, whatever works to get that cover on the piece so it looks like it's fully upholstered. And all of the pieces I'm showing you have no tacks. It's not a single tack in the frame. All done Grave style, all done minimally intrusive. And again, these are for museum collections or for historic frames, but just a cool aspect of the biz. For those of us that have to work with real frames, this is a little Eastlake chair in walnut. And typically what happens is the frames come in and they look like they've been rattled with a Gatling gun. They've got 10,000 tack holes in them. And for the last several years, a bunch of us have been working on techniques to repair these in such a way that they can be reused. And it's a combination of adding wood and epoxy. So here's that same, or actually one of that same set finished, new corner blocks and a wood combination wood epoxy repair here in the damaged areas. And that system, this is one example, it's a fairly thick piece of veneer run down along the front. That forms, if you will, a dam, which I tape in place. And then I fill in behind it with this product made by an American company called West. And it's basically a flexible marine epoxy with a filler. The filler happens to be purple colored, and we mix this up and we refer to it as purple peanut butter. It has the consistency of a thick, thick paste. It doesn't sag, and the brilliance of it is when it dries, it's not fully rigid. When we put a tack or a staple in it, it does not shatter. So it consolidates the rotten wood and it'll hold a tack. And we haven't found anything else that's better. And we tried dozens and dozens of all kinds of museum grade products and so on. And this turned out in all the tests to be the best one. So this is what we're using. So again, to try to sum up a little bit here, traditional upholstery is a hand sewn trade. You have horsehair, you have burlap and muslin, you have a well-paid tradesman back in the day with a needle and thread. And what we have today is the opposite. I don't know if you can see this detail. This joinery is a butt joint of two frames put together with a bunch of staples by a upholstery pirate who has no business being in this business. Sometimes these are the worst possible repairs. In our disposable world, I'll tell you a little story. This is a fairly well-known American book made by the Singer Sewing Company. And on the cover is a chair that looks like a nice dining chair. The question I ask you fellas, or ladies if we have any, why are the legs upholstered? Well, is it some kind of a designer thing? Well, here's what happened. I went out to teach at Mark Adams where I met Derek, and a fellow walks in and he says, "Hey Mike, I just bought this really cool designer chair. It's on the cover of the book." "Oh, that's great, Jim. How much did you pay for it?" $450. "Wow, that's a bargain. It's a designer chair." We started to take it apart. The frame bits are common pine and spruce. The joinery is done with metal mending plates. There are no tenons. There are no dowels. There's no glue. There is no pride in this workmanship. This is the most slapdash piece of junk that you could ever possibly imagine. And the chair is upholstered because the legs are the cheapest timber you can buy. So what we did is we took the pattern off the chair. Jim made a very nice set of legs. We made a proper frame. We did the chair up properly in zigger springs and foam, and he wound up with a beautiful chair with actual legs that are real wood. So don't assume that new furniture is well made. There are some tremendous cheats and terrible looking pieces of work out there that are just really shocking. And I'm assuming you see the same thing on the British side. So last piece, and this is actually put in for my friend Derek. We have a wonderful mutual friend from Wales who taught here in America for many years, and I got to work with him. His name is Aled Lewis. And hopefully Derek will connect with Aled when you guys get together with your next big show. But he was teaching up in Maine, and he designed a chair, and he asked me to consult on the upholstery. And here are my mock-ups. We're doing a 2-inch piece of firm foam on the bottom. We're doing tapered in a triangle shape to get the rake. He didn't want to rake the frame or rake the seat. We got a 2-inch piece of medium foam here, and we've got a piece of foam combination here made up for the backrest. Again, all that shape is being made in the foam. So this is me cutting the foam by hand with a kind of a manual foam cutter. I don't have a big bandsaw. This works just fine. And this is me putting a mock-up together to work back with Alid to decide how we're going to end this joint, how we're going to wrap around this back, what are we going to do with the front corner closures. And here's what we came up with for that seat. He didn't want it welted. He wanted it turned. You want them sewn. What do you want to do? And there's the chair. All of his students in the 1 year's class made these frames. And we've kind of standardized that in such a way now that you can make the frame in any kind of wood, and your upholstery components would be able to be dropped in. And they're relatively easily made by a local upholsterer. So this chair could be produced in a limited run by a fairly new furniture maker trying to make a living. So that was a really great thing that we did with Alid. And that, gentlemen, and I don't think we have any ladies, is the end of the show. And I think I'm pretty close on time, Geoffrey. I don't know where exactly we are, but
Mike, that was absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
Hang on. Let me get my view back here so I can see you guys. Oh no, that's you, Geoffrey. Okay. Where's all the lads? Okay. I can see all of you again. All right, so I'm back. And so many times when I teach and I do these little slideshows, people say, well, gee, that's an awful lot of information. My goal here was to sort of throw you in the deep end of the pool, and we'll see what bobs up in terms of questions or follow-ups or whatever. I've got any different way I can try to help you folks with real-life questions or any kind of other things you want to know about. So, well, Geoffrey, you want to moderate, or Derek, or somebody, whatever you want to do?
I will, Mike. Mike, that was absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, I've learned so much in the last 30 to 40 minutes. I'm absolutely amazed. And literally, if
thank you, Geoffrey.
We need to get you over here. So when we do the next big show, you know, it'd be great to get you here and doing some courses. Really mean that.
Well, I'd love to do a little weekend, a little one day. A lot of times on the big shows, what I've done is like a 1 or 1.5 hour seminar. And invariably, particularly if I get a great audience like you folks who actually pay attention, the question time becomes longer than the prepresentation because it's material people haven't seen before. So
going to happen tonight. I think that's going to happen tonight, Mike. So let's spring into action,
Eric,
with the questions. And so I've allowed people to unmute themselves when it's their turn to answer a question. So let's start off. The first one is Lord Purpleheart.
Oh God! You didn't have to address me as Lord Purpleheart, did you?
Well, that's what it says on my screen. It says your name right there.
Yeah, I think Geoffrey changed it again. Here's Mike for the great talk.
All right. Well, thank you. What's your question, sir?
So I've upholstered a few chairs over my short life, and short so far, and I've actually found with the webbing underneath the chairs, I've not always found it to be present. I've actually found springs tied to the twine from underneath and on top. Is that something you've seen often? I've only seen that once, but I just thought that was quite interesting.
I'm sure that you British folks have any number of different words that I don't know that describe really poor quality work.
Cowboy.
All right, well, okay. Let me just jump to the back of the shop for a second. Here's tell me you can see this. Here's which screen we're on, the big screen.
Yeah.
Here's a spring, and here's a bit of web. The classic of Sprung upholstery, the webs are on, the webs are on the bottom. So if this is the bottom of the chair and you're going to fasten these webs with tacks or staples, the tacks and staples are going upwards. So as this chair works, the tendency is for those fasteners to loosen up and the webs either sag or fail. The classic web is relatively inexpensive red striped jute like this. This is the modern version. This is a synthetic web, which is much more durable, stretches less, and holds up better. But very commonly, the failure point underneath the chair is the web. If this spring is being supported on the bottom by something other than a web, it's absolutely going to fail, because even the webs fail.
Yeah.
What I thought you were going to ask me is if you see springs set on timber, which you often see as well, where the spring is just set with a piece of web like this over the top of the coil, and then stapled in place over a solid board as a timber on the bottom. But no, you would not normally see spring tie twine on the bottom. It should only be on the top.
Yeah, well, I did it properly. Anyway.
Good, very good.
Yeah.
And again, your webs can also be up on the top of a frame where there are no springs.
Right.
You can build a very comfortable chair with top web, particularly if it's a lightweight frame and you don't have the structure or the height to put springs. For springs to work in a reasonable way, you've got to have at least 2.5, 3 inches, 4 inches of rail to spring to do any good. If the rail is real thin, you're not going to put these kind of springs in it. You're going to have to put in a serpentine spring or no spring.
Thank you very much.
I hope that answers that a little bit.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sir Nick. Over to you, Chester.
Thank you. Michael, that was amazing, because you just taught a whole month or so course in upholstery in your half an hour or 45 minutes. I have a couple of questions, but I work in the film industry, and as an art director, I use different pieces of furniture depending on the periods. And so there are different things that I use, or I have an upholsterer that works, that I hire, and he's done the double welting and things. One of the things that, simple question, was that you, in your drawing, referred to cotton stuffing, which I always referred to as batting. And perhaps that's different or not. Every question that I had written down, before I finished the question, writing it down, you pretty much answered it. So, because I was going to ask about the double welting and the GIMP.
Where are you located, sir? What part of the country are you?
I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, in the Blue Ridge Mountains, but originally from New York.
Well, North Carolina there's still a bunch of furniture in High Point.
Yeah.
Here in America, if you went to the upholstery supply to buy cotton, it comes in I don't know if you guys can see my arms. It comes in a big roll, about 24 to 30 inches wide, and we would simply just call it rolled cotton or upholsterer's cotton. On the English side, they've got all beautiful different forms of cotton, where you can get all kinds of specialty made cottons and trims. We really are so limited here in what we can buy. But upholsterer's cotton typically is, about this thick, and it comes about this wide. And a lot of upholsterers have gotten, we can also get synthetic cotton here, which I particularly don't like. But most upholsterers have abandoned cotton and just use Dacron because it's easier. You just cut it off the roll and put it in. So,
and is the Dacron considered batting?
Yeah, Dacron, what we would call here would be quilt batting or batting. So real cotton would be upholsterer's cotton or roll cotton. And you can get really dense batting, but most of it's not.
Right, right. I have one chair that belonged to my great-grandfather, and I had it redone, and I really had no idea what was inside it until we removed the fabric that was redone in the 40s. It's pretty much horsehair, and on top of the horsehair is goose feathers.
Wonderful.
And the pillow itself is just 100% goose down.
Down, yeah, old school.
So when I had it redone, I had them put back. I had them collect all the goose down, and then I went out and I bought goose down pillows, and we stole from that to supplement it. And so it's modified, but it's original in its form. But thank you it was a really great course. I'm going to ask you.
We have a number of different suppliers here in America. I have one, fortunately, right near me, where there's a feather and down workroom. They specialize just in doing feather and down cushions. That's all they do. Feather and down is a big upholstery shop. Back in the day, you would have had a feather room or a down area because it's so messy. You didn't want it to be part of your regular shop. So most shops don't do it anymore, but you can certainly get custom cushions and pillows made to specification from patterns, certainly in my area, and I'm sure in your area as well.
I use a lot of reference books, old catalogs and things like that in order to figure out what are the proper fabrics to go on period furniture, because that changes over the time. And a lot of times people will get 18th and 19th century furniture that's been reupholstered later, and they don't realize it until they remove it and you see how many nail holes there are, but that they have the wrong fabric on it. But they replicate it because they think it's original.
Well, fellas, especially, let me just say, I've got probably, I don't know, 40 or 50 PowerPoint shows in my computer of different chair projects over the years that I've done. My personal record so far is 6 layers of upholstery, one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other. The chair looked like a person had put on 6 overcoats. It was so overstuffed, and I kept taking off layers thinking it was the last one. So the good part about upholsterers being lazy pirates is that sometimes you get to the original upholstery because they were too lazy to take it off.
Yeah.
But a good source for that are the reference books. Many times Google Images, which is a fabulous source of pictures, you get that same problem where you're seeing pieces nicely upholstered, but the fabric isn't correct for the period. But there are plenty of folks that know about that stuff. If you have a question on a certain day, I'm going to post my email address here at the end of this, and you can send me an email. I'll try to help you with a project anytime.
I appreciate that. I just want to thank you again. It was a really great presentation. A lot of worthwhile knowledge. Really great.
Thank you very much, Chester. So over to Matthias now.
Yep. Hello. Thank you very much, Michael. Awesome. Very interesting presentation. My question is not so much technical, but more, shall we call it, social. Because I remember when I was growing up in Sweden in the 70s and early 80s, at some point, second half of the 1970s, all of a sudden it seemed that everybody and his uncle and her aunt were doing DIY upholstery. And also you got all of these little basement shops trying to set up an upholstery business, and most of it was pretty despicable stuff. I don't know where it came from. It might have been, I don't know, a successful DIY book or whatever. Did you have something similar in the States where everybody tried their hand at upholstery, usually with mixed results?
Well, I'm a little older than you are, and I grew up in the time of Vietnam era, you know, and we had things here called hippies.
Yeah, exactly. It was part of the. It was continuation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the people, everybody was making leather belts, macrame, plant hangers, and thinking, well, how hard can this upholstery stuff be? It's just a bunch of fabric and foam. How hard can it be?
Yeah.
So yes, very much so.
Yeah, it was.
And the tragedy is that unlike on the English side, we never had a tradition here of actually teaching upholstery as a proper skill in school, as Derek is doing. So people didn't really have a sense of what the stuff was supposed to look like. There were relatively few books, and there's a tremendous amount of really bad work that was done as a result.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can imagine. I think it was the same when I was growing up. It was definitely the tail end of the hippie era and the homesteading, the good life, that sort of thing, exactly. And
self-sufficiency.
Yes.
And also
a lot of stuff, furniture, old stuff that they could go to town on. Yeah. And also, obviously, you know, during that period was the flowery shirts. You know,
yeah.
One, you know, there we go. Very, very nice there.
We had tie dye here, fellas. Tie dye.
So did we. So did we. It's not myself with my cousin.
Okay. Next question's up to Sean.
Now I'm feeling embarrassed. I haven't had a haircut since COVID kicked in, so it must be my hippie side coming out.
That looks good. Looks good on you. Keep it, lad.
I was going to ask if you're someone like me who barely knows one end of a needle from the other,
Yeah.
What would you recommend as sort of a starting project that's within reach or good starting resources to actually try and upholster something?
Well, I teach a weekend class, and what we do is a simple slip seat, which is, if you can, I can use the word pull and tack. So it's an open frame, webbed. We put a little foam in the center. We put some foam and background on the top. We put a little muslin or calico over the top, and we bring a show cover over it and try to make it all nice and neat and fold the corners correctly and get that to look good. So that's really our first beginning project, is a simple slip seat. And then on the second day, we do a little, I do a little ottoman, a footstool with 4 coil springs. And I'll take folks that have never done upholstery in their lives on day 2, and we're doing hand-tied springs on a little 4-spring ottoman, completely done, finished, hand-sewn corners in 1 day. So it's absolutely possible to gain some really good basic skills quickly. And the book that I had in my slideshow, the one with that chair on the cover, that Singer book, here in America, we can buy those for like no money, you know, $5, $6. That's a really nice, good book. It's very, lots and lots of pictures, and a lot of the techniques that they do are similar to the ones that I teach. So that's a good book. I'm not going to do a book, even though people are bugging me to do a book. I'm not going to do one. I don't think I'm too old.
Michael, I think the biggest compliment I can give your presentation is I was now able to understand what you meant. So thank you very much.
Okay. That's very high praise. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sean. Right, over to you, Derek.
Mike.
Oh, no, he doesn't get to talk. No fair.
I'll keep it short. We can catch up later. Mike,
All
thanks
right.
very much. I really appreciate you coming on this evening. Wonderful talk. Everybody's learned an awful lot. I've been around furniture and upholstered furniture since I was sort of 14 or 15, taking stuff off and making your life a nightmare, probably.
You probably were.
But I've learned some stuff tonight, and I promise not to do some of the horrendous things I've done in the past. So I'm a reformed character. But I wanted to ask you what you put in.
Raise your hand, Derek. Take the pledge.
I will take the pledge. Yes.
All right, good. Yeah. Done that.
Dib, 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 dub, 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 and all that.
All right, good.
What goes? You showed a close-up picture of the welting.
Yeah.
Welding. What goes inside there? It looks like it might have been rubber or something, some kind of man-made material, or.
Well, the classic cording is simply cotton cord, mop cord.
Right.
What's being used now mostly is a poly cotton blend. So it's depends on the, you know, it comes in here in our world. I assume yours is the same in 32. So 432, 532, 632 in diameter, and it's usually a blend. The double welt cord is actually put up as 2 cords with a light basting over it, so it comes together as 2 pieces. So you can just, it's much easier to sew because it's doubled up. You can make double welt out of single cord, but it's easier to have the double cord. But it's really poly cotton blend is what I would call it, and it's just soft cord. In the automotive side, we're using a full polyester, full poly, no cotton. So it's extruded plastic.
Right.
So it doesn't rot. It makes it a little bit more rigid, but some of the automotive is extruded plastic as the cord.
Got it. Okay. That was it. That was my technical question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Derek. Right, Jim, over to you.
Hello, Michael. Thank you very much. That was superb. Everybody
Thank
that
you,
knows
Jim.
me, everybody that knows me knows I have nothing to do with furniture because I try not to. Otherwise, I end up making kitchens and stuff. So my question actually was relating to all of the things you said about historical restoration of furniture, particularly the stuff for clients. If, for instance, you get an English chair or a French chair or an old American chair that you're given to restore, and you're using the traditional materials, the calicos, the cottons, the so on and so forth. In the UK, we have a fire regulation for material, so you have to have a certain amount of resistance to burning, you know, in fire. How do you deal with that with regards to restoring something? Are you then tied to the new regulations?
Well, it's a really wonderful question, and it's actually very different here in America. I'm sad to say. The only strict regulation here in America for upholstered furniture and fire retardants is for the aviation industry. If I were to restore a simple little seat from a little two-seater airplane, it has to meet the most incredibly stringent requirements, including fireproofing for the leather if it's a leather seat. So it's
Right.
all got to be rated material, and it's basically fabulously expensive. And for the furniture side, there are basically no regulations. We have a requirement here that the upholsterers have to certify that the materials going back in are clean, in other words, sterilized. But fire resistance is not a requirement here for historic pieces, unless we educate the client and offer those options.
And is it a regulation for modern pieces then, or is no regulation at all in furniture manufacturing?
No, and actually some of the most terrible damage in fires is the burning of polystyrene foam creates incredibly toxic fumes that can kill people.
Yeah, exactly.
no,
Which
there are
is
no-
what the European Union and, well, particularly Great Britain, I think it's probably been at least 20 years now that they have to have a certain level of fire retardancy and a non-combustible aspect in the coat, in the outside. So it prevented interesting, very interesting. Because I don't know, Derek, do you know whether or not in the UK that when you restore something you have to then comply?
I don't know. Perhaps we should have. That might be one for Yannick, because he's obviously working with stuff like that. He seems to be a wealth of information on that. But no, I don't. I mean, that's something we can look into and come back and answer that next week.
Well, just to finish that thought, Jim, in any kind of fabric, if it's the show cover, if you're going to fireproof it or treat it or put a retardant on it, it's another chemical. And if the fabric is particularly expensive or delicate, the fire retardant can alter the fabric in such a way that it's not pleasing.
Yeah.
So it may change some different options to get it's not something that the average upholsterer would do. It would be something that would be done by a factory or somebody who specialized in fireproofing those materials. I don't know if any of you folks have ever handled like a fire-treated tarpaulin. They weigh a bloody ton because of the materials that are put in to make it like a 1 hour fire rating. So you're putting something in, some waxy material into the fabric so it retards the progression of the fire, but invariably it has some effect, particularly on silk. So we don't really, it's not really considered, and should be. I agree with you very much.
Yeah, it's the law in the UK that you can't sell anything without a fire certificate on a label, and you're not even allowed to remove the label.
That's a good law.
Yeah, but it's just something that entered my head when you were talking about all the natural materials. Excellent. Okay, I've had my
Lovely.
time. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you very much, Jim. Okay, over to Raphael.
Oh, hi. Hey, sorry I came in a little late, but the topic brought to mind a piece of furniture my dad left me many years ago. He made them in Peru. He made me a desk. And the chair that came with it, he upholstered with leather. But unfortunately, my cats got to it, and they scratched it and punctured it. And,
Cats are good for business.
Not very good shape. So I was wondering if what kind of leather should I get to replace it? Is that something I can get here in the U.S.? And also, you think by following the pattern of the old upholstery, I could do it myself, or is that something that I should have somebody else do it?
Well, I'll stick my neck out here. In a minute at the end, I'm going to put up my email address. If you want to send me a picture of the chair, I can give you some better advice. I could do a whole half-hour talk on leather and how to buy it and what to do with it. It's a natural material. It does not behave the same way as fabric. It is more challenging to work with. What you want generally is a relatively lightweight leather. Leather's measured in ounces, so 2 to 3 ounce weight would be typical for upholstery, as opposed to like a 9 or 10 ounce weight, which you'd make your leather belt out of. So you have to get the right weight of leather. You've got to get reasonable quality, and you've got to, to some extent, know how to cut the hide because it stretches differently because of different parts of the animal move different ways. So you've got to have a little bit of knowledge about how to cut the leather. Usually in a commercial shop here in America, it's a 10% extra charge on the labor just to cut the leather, because you need a skilled person to make sure you get the right yield and the right pieces come from the right places of the cow. So it's a little bit more challenging, but if you want to send me an email, I can give you, there's some excellent suppliers here in America that sell leather reasonably on eBay. And they are, I just did a set of chairs 2 days ago that the leather came was beautiful. So it is possible to get reasonably good quality leather inexpensively here in America. And if it's not real elaborate, maybe you could do it.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I remember when he made it. I mean, it's been 20 or 25 years ago, or 30 years that he made them.
Well, the only last thing I'll say about leather is this. I just did some little dining room chair seats, a set of 8 a couple days ago. And in order to get them, the corners pulled really nicely and the way I wanted them, I needed to use a little steam. I have a little hand steamer. It was a travel job. I got a big steamer here in the shop, but you can't really get the leather to behave exactly sometimes without a little bit of steam. So just another little extra technique that we would use, like in automotive work, if it was vinyl, we would use a heat gun, dry heat. But on leather, we would use steam just to get that extra little bit of movement, to get that last little wrinkle so it looks beautiful. So some techniques that are different with leather are just kind of not necessarily transferring over from the fabric work.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you so much.
Well, Mike, when you say statements like I can give half an hour talk on leather, I think that everybody would agree that maybe in a few weeks' time we'd love to hear a talk on leather. Look at the thumbs up everywhere. Look,
I don't,
it's got to be done there.
I'll tell you what I thought you were going to say is, any of you folks that are dealing with old pieces, I just did a similar talk like this, but what they wanted was a follow-on of the epoxy and wood repairs for the damaged frames, because that's something that really can save your butt if you're in a restoration situation, as opposed to having to tear a whole chair apart and rebuild it. If you can consolidate and repair what's there, so that's another possibility we could talk about another day.
Well, there we go. We've now got 2 extra talks. We're certainly doing well. And you've got to be really careful here, Mike. When you talk about old pieces, that's no way to talk about us like that. Sharpen up myself there. Anton, over to you.
Hi. Thank you for a wonderful talk and really exciting. I was just really amazed by your opening statement when you meant you are mourning the lack of guild organization in the American upholstering business, which was amazing to me, because in your talk I saw insights into 3 or 4 trades, what it would be in the Austrian or German tradition. Because what you described as upholstery would be the job of a puzzlement maker, saddler, upholstering in the German-speaking world is connected to tapestry hangers and
yes,
things.
as it is in France.
It's the uppermost layer.
Yep.
So all the inside work you did would not be done by upholsterer in our world, which is really interesting. So it was great to see the overview.
In America, anyone with a blank piece of paper can make a sign and hang it outside the door and be an upholsterer.
Yeah, but it's just so amazing. It's so many trades you unify. So there is also an upside to this, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, unfortunately here in America in real life, because we don't have the background and training, the work is done either badly or not at all. Where you'll see pieces that are beautifully done, where somebody will rip all the upholstery out and literally put in a piece of plywood and some foam out of ignorance for how to do it correctly. And all this historic provenance is lost. So in America, we have not done ourselves well with our lack of training in the trades.
Yeah, but you wouldn't find an Austrian upholsterer sewing stuff, because this would be another trade, so he wouldn't be allowed to do it.
Correct, as it would be in France. Yeah.
So it's nice to also see the wholesome approach from your side.
I'm not sure I'll get all the way to Austria, but I had a wonderful time a couple of nights ago watching a very wonderful Austrian lose in the U.S. Open final to a very nice German. So I was kind of rooting for the tall kid, but I'm not unhappy that Dominic won.
I leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Lovely. Okay, Mitch, over to you.
Hi, Michael.
Hello.
Really enjoyed your talk. Thanks very much for that. Jim actually got ahead of me asking about the fire prevention, so I had to think on my feet. And I was going to ask you now, are you a tack hammer or a pneumatic tacker?
I kind of knew I was going to get this question. So this, can you see this? This fella right here is C.S. Osborne, number 33. This hammer is 45 or 46 years old. I've got several dozen of these because I teach and I bring tools with me. If you blindfolded me and put all the hammers on the bench, I can find this hammer. This hammer and I are well acquainted for forever. I will never, ever, ever give this up. However, neither will I give up this. Okay? This is upholstery tacker made in Germany. It's the premier one. It shoots a 22 wire 3/8 crown staple. I've got several different staplers of different sizes, and there is no way to try to make a living in this trade without one of these.
So would you use these staples all over, or would you use tacks in certain places, staples elsewhere?
Well, it's interesting. When I teach, I have a little button, pin-on button I give to my students, and it says, tack twice, staple once. I use the tacks the way the dressmaker would use a pin. So we'll take the tacks and put them in and set everything, and then pull a little here, pull a little there, reposition the tack, reposition, get everything the way it should be, proper, flip it, turn it, look at it, and then and only then does it get stapled. So I use a combination of tack and staple, but in the world of trying to make a living, staples are invaluable. And the other thing is, in working with damaged frames, the wire staples are less damaging than the big tacks. So in some cases, I can do something with a staple that I would be really scared to do with a tack to get me to a place for that particular piece that I can get what I want and the strength I want without having to worry about splitting the frame. So that particular piece that I can get what I want and the strength I want without having to worry about splitting the frame, the wood.
So that's where you can accept people giving you thinner rails.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm glad I had to rethink my question because I really enjoyed your answer there.
Well, I didn't get this question, but I'll just give you the answer anyway. The rails that I would prefer always for upholstery would be air dried. If you kill dry a piece of timber, it's like cooking a piece of meat. The inside is pink, but the outside is charred. So you give me a piece of air dried white ash as opposed to a piece of KD white ash, that KD is going to be harder for me to get the tacks in because the outside surface is hardened up.
Yeah.
It's hardened. So I would like a softer meat. I would like birch, soft maple, white ash is wonderful, tulip. I don't want beech. I don't want oak. I don't want hard maple. That's just
fantastic. Thank you.
Not necessary.
Right. Mike, thank you very, very much. I'd like everybody to raise their bench beverages and to toast Mike. I'm very sorry, everybody. My internet is almost gone. I'm just trying to say bench beverages to toast Mike for what a wonderful talk that you've done. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Cheers.
Carry on, lads. Good stuff. Someday I'll come visit.
It's a high-tech conversation.
On the low-tech topic.
Live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Bench Talk 101.